What is up, Internet Basketball Junkies? Coach Hack here with Coach John Ashworth. We've got a special topic today. We're talking exit interviews, how to nail your exit interviews with your players, with your assistant coaches, with your feeder school coaches. I'm excited to dive into the topic. Coach, thanks so much for coming on and talking with us.
Hey, excited to be back again. I want to give a quick shout out to the Indiana Hoosiers, national champs. Had to wear the hat, so we're all very proud as Hoosiers for Kurt Signetti in the national championship. So wanted to make sure I shouted that out.
I'm not very happy about Ohio State's performance, but if Ohio State couldn't win, I really love the storyline of Coach Signetti. It's just it's magical. I'm on record saying that it's the most impressive coaching feat in the history of sports ever. Period. No matter what sport.
Yeah,
I'm not a
yeah.
big football guy, but I can't think of anything. But he took over a graveyard program and then mopped the entire country. Within 2
It's
years.
been an incredible story. Yeah, Hoosier, we all hopped on the bandwagon. We admit it. But there was no bandwagon to even hop on before he got here. So we were just really, really proud, and it's been awesome for our state and for Hoosiers.
Yeah, when Ohio State went to play Indiana, and they're talking about Indiana hasn't beaten Ohio State in 35 years. It's like, this is unbelievable that this guy's even keeping them in the game, let alone knocking them off.
Yeah, it's exciting because I think the landscape now, he can keep them relevant. Yeah, I think Indiana's here to stay. So I feel bad for you Ohio State fans out there.
Well, do you just want to swap topics? We can talk about Signetti. I love to talk about Signetti.
Yeah,
I do have all the graphics.
Let's put 5 minutes. Let's put 5 minutes into Signetti. Talk about him for sure.
I have all the graphics set up for exit interviews, but if you want to pivot on the fly, man, I'm
no. Let's talk exit interviews, and then at the end we can come back to Signetti. I know a lot of people are probably sick of hearing about him, but as coaches, it is fun to analyze what he's done.
Well, Coach, I'm interested to hear about the Game Shots newsletter. What'd you talk about in your newsletter last week?
Yes. So again, we do a coach's newsletter every Wednesday, drops at 9:42 a.m. It is completely free. This past week, we talked about just the culture that you're setting. You may not see the results on a day-to-day basis, but it can come to fruition later down the road. One of the stories I talked about this week was I was contacted by 2 different players from previous years, just out of the blue, got text messages from these players just checking in. One was just very grateful. Hey, thanks for all the lessons. He's now playing at the college level. He's a captain, and he's kind of dealing with some of that leadership and the things that we talked about when he was in high school. And he kind of rolled his eyes when he was a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old. And now that he's, a quote unquote adult, he's having his own challenges. He said, your lessons make sense now, coach. So, my overall message this week in the newsletter is that, sometimes you feel like you're just talking to a wall. The kids aren't getting your messages. You're trying to preach about culture and doing the right things. And you may not see those results till years down the road when a kid finally matures. So, you shouldn't stop preaching the right things. Keep trying to reach kids. If you can reach a few, then, you did your job and it was worth it.
Well, good stuff, everybody. If you're not hooked up to Coach Ashworth's newsletter, get on there, Google it up, and get signed up because there's good stuff going out every week. Hey, Coach, let's dive into the exit interview topic here. Exit interviews certainly sound simple on the surface, but I think it can make some coaches uncomfortable for different reasons. I really view them as like a growth opportunity for a program. Some people view it as like an administrative chore, and it can be an administrative chore when you've got to line up and get all your kids to come through. And there's other things you'd like to be doing with your time. Some kids, they're mailing in their exit interview. It can be a chore, but I think it's an absolute necessity if you really want to get your program aligned. So some coaches, if they're getting kind of raw feedback, that can make a coach feel vulnerable. But I think the practice of an exit interview, certainly at the end of the season, has a lot of merit. And I've even done some at the end of summer where I did 2 exit interviews a year. I wouldn't do that every year, but I would say exit interviews end of season would be a mandatory practice for me coaching. How are you feeling about exit interviews?
Yeah, I think as a young coach, it's a vulnerable spot because the feedback almost feels like criticism. It's like, like, is this how you really feel about me? And even though it's truly just, you should audit yourself, you should audit your program. And the more feedback you get, as a coach, if you're truly trying to improve, it's a great way to improve yourself, improve your practices, improve your program as a whole. So it can be a vulnerable thing for a young coach, but as you get older and you do it more and more, you get more comfortable with it. And like you said, it becomes a vital part of improvement. And it really gives you insights that you might not see as a coach when you hear from players, from your assistant coaches, or even down to your youth coaches. So I think it's an absolute vital thing that you should do every year.
Yeah, I think some coaches are afraid of what they'll hear, or they're afraid that they won't hear the truth. They won't be able to get to the truth. Can you remember the first time you ever did exit interviews, and or maybe a
Yeah.
situation where you wish you would have done exit interviews and you didn't have that practice set up yet?
Yeah. So my first year at one of my more recent stops, I did it with the senior class. So after the season was over, did it with the senior class. We had 5 seniors. The first 4 went great. I mean, the kids were really honest. Most of it was positive, but they did give some pointers, what they didn't like, what they would keep, what they would get rid of. And then I do forewarn people, you got to be careful. You have to be ready for any type of answer,
Oh
because
yeah.
I did have one kid. He was a senior, unfortunately didn't get as much playing time as he thought he should. So he almost took it as an opportunity. This was his chance to kind of, tell me all the things I did wrong and how I sucked as a coach and all those things. And,
I've had a few of
I
them too.
try to remain professional and just say, thank you for your input. And, I'm sorry that, it wasn't the experience that you had hoped it had, would be, but you have to be ready for those kinds of conversations and to handle those professionally. But yeah, I thought it was a great, just kind of eye opener for me to hear from these seniors. They were really honest. Like you said, you have to really make sure they're comfortable giving you honest answers. You don't
Yeah.
want them just to mail it in or just tell you what you want to hear. But yes, I remember the first year I did it at my new school that I had just gotten to. It was an interesting experience, but it was very, very valuable to hear from those 5 players.
Yeah, the more and more that I talk to you, the more and more similarities that I find, because the situation that you outlined, I had the same exact one where after my first year of coaching, I had taken over a program that had not been very relevant, and we had won district for the first time in 10 years. We made it to regionals. We lost in the regional semifinals. We had a great year. I was mowing down these exit interviews. Everybody was just gushing over the change in the program and how well we did. And I had a kid come in who really blindsided me, in all honesty, because he was a junior. And when I took over the program, he was like our 9th guy, and I really liked him. But I really didn't want to run a 9-man rotation. I ended up settling on 8. He was kind of on the fringes of varsity and JV all year. He got some opportunities to come in and play some varsity minutes, but he mostly played JV. And I thought he had a pretty good experience. I wanted him to have a good experience. I liked the kid, and he come in and just say, I'm not playing next year. You didn't do a good job. This program is bad for this reason and that reason. And I honestly, I got flustered, and I was thankful that I had an assistant coach. I had 2 assistant coaches in there, and they kind of reeled me in before I kind of jumped out of my chair and embarrassed myself a little bit. But I was completely caught off guard, and I think that's a good point to think about before we launch into these templates that we're going to look at for exit interviews. Is it's good to have an assistant coach. I'd make sure to have an
Yes.
assistant coach in the room with you, at least one.
Yes, I can tell you that I'm glad you made that point, because I can tell you another experience where I had an, excuse me. It's super important to have an assistant coach there because I had an exit interview, and all I did with each player was go over stats. Part of the improvement or the exit interview for them, if they were not a senior, was if you're a kid coming back, here's your stats from the season. And I would ask them, hey, what do you need to improve on? What stats stand out? What are good? What are bad? And I unfortunately had a kid go home and tell his parent, coach told me I suck, that I'm a terrible shooter. I should never shoot the ball. And just like this huge, long, like criticism. And
Yeah.
and all I did was show the kid, the stats and just said, hey, these need to be improved. Just like that. And luckily I had an assistant coach there who was able to kind of back me up and just say, no, all we did was hand the kid his stats and, and talked about, these, if you're shooting 18% from three, like, yes, that needs to improve, but, before next year and, was trying to be positive. But yeah, having an assistant coach there is vital just to make sure, yes, you protect yourself in case any of these exit interviews do go awry.
Yeah, ineffective exit interviews are a waste of time, so we want to do them right. And they also can give a coaching staff of kind of a false confidence where they feel like things are headed in the right direction, and they might be. So you kind of have to be a master at pulling out the information, the truth. So let's talk about, why do you think sometimes exit interviews can be ineffective? Do you have any reasons that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, the kids, like you said, if a kid has a good experience, he's just going to tell you everything was great,
Yeah.
and 100% of it couldn't have been great.
Yeah.
And I think there's kids, there's a lot of kids that they're people pleasers. They don't, they just, for a 17, 18-year-old, that's an uncomfortable position to say, hey, coach, I really didn't like that you did this. Or, hey, coach, I know you love that drill, but we all hated it.
Yeah.
That's an uncomfortable position for a 17 or 18-year-old to kind of be in. So yeah, you have to be very careful and really, really reiterate, hey, this stays between us. Like, you're not going to get in trouble. Like,
Yeah.
I've really found that seniors are really honest after they graduate,
Yeah.
because now, hey, you can't punish me. There's no going back. My career's over here. So I have found that seniors love being very honest and telling you, exactly what's on their mind. But you're right. Sometimes the sophomores and juniors, that you may not get the full scope of how they truly feel.
Yeah, I think for ineffective exit interviews, sometimes there can be like a rushed nature to it. I don't think you want that experience. There's just so many things going on after a season ends, and you're trying to do a bunch of kids, and you're trying to do 6 or 7 exit interviews at one time. And if you're not really in the moment with the exit interview, it can go be ineffective. Not being able to get the truth, where players aren't feeling safe enough to tell you the truth, I think can make for an ineffective exit interview. And then also coaches that don't like the truth, where they hear something that they don't like, and they are holding grudges, or they're getting a little emotional over it. So you got to be kind of receptive to hear the feedback, even if it's not feedback that you necessarily like. But I think you want to view these exit interviews as kind of diagnostics for your program, not necessarily like you're trying to defend the decisions that you made or validating your coaching. It's about like pattern recognition. It's about identifying blind spots that you might not be thinking about, or disconnects in certain areas. So I'd highly recommend exit interviews, but you got to be doing them for the right reasons. So if you're looking to kind of spot trends as you go through your program of players and coaches and feeder school coaches, if one person says one thing, that's kind of just like an anecdote. But if you hear, 2 people say the same thing, that could be a coincidence. But if you've got 5 different people telling you the same thing, that's a signal that you should be paying attention to. And I think having that kind of mindset where you're not going to jump at something that you don't necessarily agree with, but that you can also, if you're getting that feedback on a repetitive basis, you can take it to heart and you can make changes through it. So when you're hearing the same thing from players, from an assistant coach, and from a middle school coach, you can't really ignore that. You've got to really address that. So I've got 3 different templates here that we're going to go through. One is for exit interviews with your players, and one is for exit interviews with your assistant coaching staff, and one is for exit interviews with your feeder school coaches. And I think it's important to do it that way. You don't want to have one form to interview your coaches and your players and your middle school coaches, because the players, they're going to experience the program at kind of an emotional level, while your assistant coaches get to see more of like the operational side of how you run a program. And then with your middle school coaches, it's about like the culture trickle down. So there's kind of 3 angles there, and you don't want to be stuck with a generic template. You want something specific to each of those. But if you ask everybody the same kind of questions, you're going to get shallow answers, in my opinion. But if you ask the right people the right questions, you're going to get clarity here. So we'll jump into those documents. Coach, what's your feelings on exit interviews in terms of, we already established you should have an assistant coach in the room. Are you trying to do all of your exit interviews with just a single player, or would you be fine doing them in groups in certain situations?
I definitely think, like, if you're a varsity coach, it's going to be impossible for you to have true, like, with every player in your program, if you're going from freshman, JV to varsity. So usually what we would do is we would meet with the freshman team after their season was over, kind of give an overall view of, hey, here's how the season went, and then open it up for them, because I think freshmen too, they've kind of decided at the end of the year, like, I'm done. I'm never going to play basketball again. Or, man, I really want to be a JV or varsity player next year. Yeah. And so what I would do is I would open it up for the freshmen, and I would say, hey, if you do want to meet with me, here's my schedule, set up a time. We'll talk, I can talk you through things that you might need to improve. I'll ask you some questions about how your experience went. But I think, like, trying to go through every freshman is probably overkill. Same thing with, the JV season. I would try to meet with every JV player and every varsity player after the season was over, setting up those schedules. But yeah, you're right. You got to make sure that you're taking those meetings serious, and the players know that they're serious. They're not just like, oh, hey, get your meeting done. Okay. Hey, it's, our season finished on Friday, next Monday, everybody just do your interviews. You got to make sure that it's valuable for you, but it's also, you're giving the players some form of value that they can leave that meeting with. They can take it, and then they know maybe what they need to work on in the off season, or maybe they understand how you felt their season went as a coach. And you always want to leave that in a positive way, or give them something of value that they can go work on.
Yeah, I've always practiced that the middle school level, that was kind of up to the coach. I'd encourage them to do it, but I wasn't breathing down their neck to make sure they did it. I'd like them to at least give feedback to their players. At the freshman level, I had my freshman coach do those separately. And then that kind of left me from a player's standpoint, as we would have, maybe 24 players that were between varsity and junior varsity. And that was kind of manageable, where you could schedule 6, 7, or 8 of them in a row on a certain day, knock it out in 3 to 4 days, get your middle school coaches in another time, get your varsity coaches in another time. And then it's, it'll take you a week to get through your whole program, but if that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do. So at times I've done some batch exit interviews when I felt like it made sense for the program. I tried to avoid that, but if there was a group of 2 kids or 3 kids that I felt were on the same development curve, or, some circumstance that it made sense, I would do that for a time-saving measure. But we've kind of expressed here that these exit interviews are really for your alignment of your program. It's answering the question, is your program what you think your program is? It answers the question, what do people experience your program to be? And what you think it is and what they think it is, or their experience, that doesn't necessarily always align. What do you think is kind of more dangerous here? A coach who doesn't ask the questions or do exit interviews, or a coach that does them but doesn't change with the feedback that they receive?
Man, I think success is blinding. I really do. I think a lot of coaches, you have success, and if we're honest, a lot of the times you have success is because you have talent. You have some talented kids, and yes, we're all a part of that development of that talent. But if you have two Division I players on your team, you're probably going to have a good high school season. Like you should. And then there's years where, you may not have a whole lot of talent, but you learn a lot about your program. I've had kind of the tiered, what I mean by this is like really successful season, but then there's all these underlying issues you didn't see. And you do these interviews, and these kids didn't enjoy the season, or this kid, he had a lot of success, but he hated this part of practice, or he hated this aspect of our program. And you're going like, whoa, I thought everybody had a fun season. And then sometimes you find the opposite, right? Sometimes you might have a losing season, or it's a struggle. You're not winning as many games as you think you should. And then you get to the end, and you hear from these kids that, Coach, I had a great experience. I loved it. I know we didn't win as many games as we should have, but I loved playing, for this program. We did so many like great things, and it kind of surprises you on that side where you wouldn't have expected a really positive response, and then you get that. So I've seen it both, where it's kind of surprising sometimes where success is blinding, and you think everybody's going to have this great positive response at the end of the year, and then you find out like, whoa, like they really caught me off guard. Like I didn't realize all these issues were going on, and we had this much like problems behind the scenes, and now you can go correct those.
Yeah, to me, from my experience in coaching, I've found that if you're having success on the court and winning games, and you have a team that's enjoyable to be around and to coach, you have to absolutely cherish it, because those seasons don't happen very often. I've had seasons where we've been tremendously successful on the court, and it's been a hard group to work with. It's been, a lot of stress off the court, a lot of issues to go through. And then for the coaches out there that are struggling to win games, if you're not winning games and your kids are not enjoyable to be around, that's a real rough go around to be a high school basketball coach and experience that. But I think coaches and programs that embrace these exit interviews, they win in the long term, because I think that, programs that listen for feedback, they're going to be able to adapt faster if they're doing it the right way. And programs that are able to adapt, they can retain their players and they can retain their coaches better. And what does that allow you to do? It allows you to compound the culture of your program. When you're keeping players in your system, you're keeping your coaches in your system, then all that stuff is more of a seamless transition from one year to another, because you've got people in place that know your boundaries, your rules, your style, and all of that. So, I think a lot of programs review a lot of game film and stats, but I don't know that all programs really do a review of all their people that are involved in their program. And that's where this kind of exit interview practice comes in. So we'll jump into the documents now. I'd encourage the audience to kind of pay attention to the why this question exists, because each question we're kind of digging at something. We're trying to find something out. And it's not always straightforward, and we'll have those conversations. But, every question's kind of designed to uncover something specific. So, Coach, while I set up the templates here, I wanted to ask you, what's kind of the hardest truth that a coach can hear in an exit interview?
That's a good question. I think maybe one question that always struck me was when you ask, if you could get rid of anything in our program, what would you get rid of? Right? If you had a magic wand, you could get rid of anything in our program. And some of the answers would surprise me. the drills that you thought were like great drills, the kids would say like, those didn't really help us. And you never know, maybe I hated shell drill in my high school career playing, and our coach made us do 20 minutes of shell drill every day, but there was a reason we were really good defensively. So like sometimes you got to take that. I probably would have told my coach, like, get rid of shell drill, and that would have been the wrong answer. So you got to take some things with a grain of salt. But yeah, like some of the off the court things that you hear from players, like, hey coach, I didn't feel like you handled this player with accountability. When you hear that like accountability word, I think that really hits you as a coach, because we always feel like we're tough on our players. We feel like we hold kids accountable, but sometimes perception is different than reality. And so you get these kids that are like, hey, I didn't feel like you held that kid accountable, and it was noticeable to everybody else.
Yeah.
And when you hear that really hits you as a coach, and can really like, it stings, but it's good to know, because you thought you were holding them. You thought you were being accountable and being tough on the kid, but the other kids might not feel that way. And when you have a disconnect there, that can really hurt your, fracture your culture and things like that. So those are good things to hear from players though.
Yeah, good stuff there. I think for me, it's the kid who comes in and says, I'm not planning to play next year. And that's always, sometimes you might have a heads up about that, but sometimes it can be surprising. And that kind of eliminates a lot of this process of what we're trying to do. And then you're in a position of kind of figuring out how you want to react to that, whether you want to kind of let them down easy, or if you want to start kind of fighting to get them back in the program. But kind of being blindsided by learning that information at the start of an exit interview process, I think can be hard. But let's get into the document here. And the way that I've always done this practice is make copies of this. I give it to the players. The players fill it out with a pencil or a pen. They write it, and then they bring it to the exit interview. So I am reading what they have already written on the paper as we talk about these things. So it's not like every one of these questions is a complete surprise to me to react to with dialogue. I really know how they're feeling, and I can kind of unpack how they're feeling based on what they've already written on the document. But this is going to be exit interviews specifically for players in your program. And I'd start it off by just kind of an icebreaker here. Feedback on the season. What did you think overall? What were the highs and lows? And did you have any regrets? And this is interesting because the overall element of it and the high element of it are kind of, just icebreakers to get a conversation, but you can really find something out if somebody's talking about a low point, and you can really find something out if people are talking about regrets that they had. I wish I would have got to play more JV minutes so that I could have got more on-court experience during the season. Or, the low point was when I was out with injury and I didn't really feel like I was a part of the team because, you guys moved on and I couldn't participate. So what do you think about this kind of first line of questioning, just trying to establish where we're at looking at the season?
Yeah, it's interesting to me. Sometimes you find out like players are really hard on themselves. Yeah. Where you as a coach, you thought they had a great year. It was a 5 out of 5. They gave a great effort. They really, really kind of matched their potential. And then you talk to them and they're like, oh, it was a 2 out of 5. I played terrible. I thought I had a terrible season. And you get to kind of see where they're at mentally. Maybe they're struggling with confidence, or maybe they're struggling with where they feel about themselves. And then that gives you an opportunity as a coach where you can, whoa, like, no, you had a great season, and really try to build them back up. I've been surprised how many players do that, where they're really, really hard on themselves. Like they're almost their own worst critic. They're dealing with a lot of pressure at home with their parents' expectations. And so that gives you a great opportunity as a coach to really, really just reiterate how your confidence level in them and that you thought they had a good season.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because that can surprise you too as a coach, where that there's players that are hard on themselves, but a lot of the answers will really reflect that. That's why I think it's kind of important to get it in writing ahead of time so you can hedge against it instead of trying to react to it on the fly. But my second kind of line of questioning here is very, very direct, and it's worded very intentionally. What are the most divisive things or people holding our program back? And that, divisive is a very strong word. And that's what we kind of want to have happen here is we want to bring out these kind of feelings and emotion of, it could be a drill, it could be a particular coach, it could be a player. And, we talk about why that happened and, how we're going to get past it. What's our plan to move forward with? But I like the kind of the verbiage of, this, you can't really duck this question. If you're asking for most divisive things or people, you're really asking for a blunt reply. And if somebody wants to give you raw and honest feedback, that's an invitation to do so. What do you think, Coach?
I love just the directness. I think too many coaches and too many people in athletics just kind of beat around the bush, like, oh, did you have a good experience? Yes, no, why? And like you get generic answers with that. Like this is very direct. Hey, who is causing issues in our program?
Yeah.
Or what is causing issues in our program? What's holding us back? And you get some really, like you said, I think some honest answers, some surprising answers where you thought this kid was like a really good teammate and 5 of his other teammates are going, no, this guy's a problem, and it helps you understand that as a coach. Or maybe you have an assistant coach who you think's doing a great job and, 4 players go, hey, like he's too much, or we don't like how he treats us, or so, there's always something that can come to light with this type of question because it's so direct.
Yeah, and what you'll get here is things like what you talked about earlier, where a player might be saying, this player, I don't feel like you're holding this player accountable. They're distracting us from our season. You might get something about an assistant coach where they're saying, he's not teaching us anything or something of that nature. So you'll get all kinds of things. These drills that we did too much shell drill. We didn't get to play enough in practice, but there's value in all of it. And again, one kid saying one thing is just that. But if you hear the same thing from 5 different kids or coaches, I think you really need to be paying attention to that. So next line of questioning would be, what can our staff do better to help our team function? And this is kind of open-ended, where a player could take it to addressing other players on the team, or it could be how we structure practice, how we choose our drills, even to how we travel or pregame or things like that. This is really an open-ended question for players to take different directions. So how do you feel about just asking for what can our coaching staff do better?
I think this is the question that young coaches struggle with, right? This is the vulnerable question because it almost feels like a personal attack if somebody puts something down here. And so you have to be very, very open with this question and take it, like I said, take it as a form of like an audit. Like this is to help you. The kid feels this way. And like you said, there's outliers where, 20 kids love this and this one kid doesn't love it. Like, okay, maybe that was just that one kid. But if you are seeing 3, 4, 5 kids say the same thing, this can help us function. And then the other part of this question is sometimes you find out that there's things off the court. One of my favorite books is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yeah.
And that really talks about like a lot of what breaks down a team isn't like what's on the court, right? It's that stuff off the court. And so this question kind of can hit at some of those things off the court that can really help, or hurt your functioning as a program. So this is a great question.
Yeah. So next we're diving into a very pointed question. Who deserved an opportunity or more playing time that didn't get one? And I think what you'll uncover here is kind of a player's perspective of how they evaluate other players compared to how you evaluate them. And what I think you really want to avoid is trying to explain away why you did what you did. You're not in there to explain to them why this kid didn't get a bigger role or this kid only got this or that minutes. You don't want to turn it into you trying to cover your tracks in your thought process. You really just want to kind of help you open your eyes to who kind of thinks what players might have helped us more or should have been elevated up through the program. And again, it's one of those things where one player saying one thing about another kid but if you're getting an over and over, there's the same thing of this kid should have been done more, you can really take stock in that. Do you think that this is a good idea to ask kids? It's kind of unavoidable to talk about other kids or your coaching staff through these if you're really doing them open and honestly, but this question is very direct to name somebody. Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
Yeah, I love this form of questioning. We've even done different examples. I've done things like, who should be the starters? Like, put down your five kids that should be on the court. Or I've even had, rank the top 10 kids in our program from first to best. Like, first is the best to 10 being like, that's the 10th best.
Yeah.
And it is so illuminating to see where some kids, one, view themselves. You have a kid that's like, a sixth man on the JV team, and you say, hey, who's the top 10 kids in our program? And he's like, I'm number one. And you're like, son, like you're so far off here. I appreciate the confidence, but it is really good, like you said, to see how they view some other kids. Like, this kid should have got more playing time. I will say sometimes you got to be careful because they do have a tendency to put their friend down, their best friend on the team that they get along with. They're, he should have got more playing time. And you're like, really, should he have? Like, or is this just your buddy? So you got to be careful. So that's where we kind of got into ranking kids, where you're like, who are the top 10 kids in our program? You tell me who should be playing varsity. And you get some very, very interesting answers. And you get to see like where kids rank each other, or where they rank themselves. So I've always found that interesting. But yeah, I do love this type of just direct question. Who should be playing more?
Yeah, so now we're moving into kind of a flurry of questions. So if I was covering this with a player and I agreed with the things that they put down, I might even just skip over it. But if there's something where I want to add more to it or expand a little bit, I might hit on all of these, where you're asking about, was your playing time adequate to your opinion? What position are you? There, you can get your eyes opened a little bit, where you might have pegged a kid as a guard, but there's really some flexibility in your system where I actually wanted to try the 5 a little bit this year, coach, but I didn't get a chance to. And then you've got strengths and areas to improve. So certainly strengths and areas to improve are kind of the cornerstone of you giving feedback to the player on where you want them to take their game. Any thoughts on this little bundle of questions here?
Yeah, anytime we've done this, we've always just provided season stats as well. I think numbers don't lie. And I think anytime you're trying to tell a kid to improve, it is subjective. But if you have stats like, hey, you shot 18% from 3, we expect, our goal for guards is, whatever, 40% from 3. That's something you need to improve on. So we've always tried to provide season-long stats or even conference stats, things like that, so that really kind of backs up what we're trying to say. But yeah, I think that, like you said, that line of questioning, you get to kind of see, what do they think their strengths are? Where do they think they need to improve on? And then it gives you a chance to add on or to agree, or sometimes like they might think, they might think shooting is a strength, and you're like, whoa, buddy, like, no, this is an area we had as a coaching staff that you need to improve. But then on the flip side, they might have a lot of criticisms of themselves on those areas of improve, and you say, oh no, like, we think you're actually really good at this.
Yeah.
So you got to be, very strategic about how you answer those. But I do think it's important, like I said, for the player to leave with some sense of value after the meeting. They don't just feel like beat up. They don't feel like it was just a criticism session. They feel like, okay, the coaches have confidence in these areas, and then these areas I need to improve on.
Yeah, good stuff there. I always like to ask the kids if they think they're a good teammate. And I can tell you, through 9 years of doing exit interviews, it is unanimous that all the kids think that they're a good teammate. And I try to prompt them into why they think that is. And this is an opportunity to give some feedback where you can say, I do think you're a good teammate, but I can remember several times through the season where you fouled out of the game or you came out of the game and you were, emotional on the sidelines and sitting by yourself instead of, staying in the game and cheering on your teammates and encouraging people. So it's kind of an opportunity for you to plant some seeds back in their head on maybe some behaviors that you wouldn't classify as being a good teammate. And, it's usually not stuff that disqualifies them from being a good teammate. It's just kind of an opportunity to plant some seeds on here's where we could improve as a teammate moving forward. So to this point in the exit interview, we are kind of putting a wrap on last season, where we've got feedback on last season and we've also given feedback to the players. And now we're kind of moving into a segment where we're projecting forward and we're making a plan to move forward with. So I would start that by saying, do you continue to plan to play next year? And if they say no, it kind of voids the rest of the exercise. So at that point, you'd be making a decision. Do I want to start to try to talk them out of that already? Do I want to kind of just let it go and shake their hands and move on after a couple more minutes of conversation? So I would say this point in the exit interview, we're starting to look forward into next season and kind of the overall big picture view of the player within the program. So that's an interesting question. It's usually a yes. Every once in a while you get surprised with a no, but once they agree that they want to participate in the program moving forward, now we start talking about goal setting. So we're talking about a micro goal. Do you have a micro goal, which would be in this summer and fall period, what can you commit to do? And then a macro goal where it's like, if we're talking to a sophomore, what do you want to have it accomplished by the time that you graduate? So getting into goal setting and looking forward, any thoughts on goals here, Coach?
Yeah. Going back to, do you plan to continue to play? See, I'm always the one, if they say no, I don't want to play next year, I've always been the guy that's like, hey, thanks for your service. We appreciate you. And then just be done. And I'm not going to beg you to play. Yeah. I want guys that want to be a part of it. Now, I've broken my rule one time. I had a kid who was a football player, hell of an athlete. He's playing college football now. And he, going into his senior year, he had been a kid who busted his tail. He had played JV as a junior. And I'm like, hey, man, senior year is going to be your year. You've paid your dues. Like, you're going to be our starting center. We love what you can bring. And we just graduated a kid. And he came into his exit interview going into the summer and was like, I just want to focus on football. I'm going to play college football. And at first, I was just like, all right, man, that's your decision, and kind of let it go. And I talked to my dad, he's like a Hall of Fame high school football coach. And he's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, go get that guy. Like, you need him. He's like he's a Division I athlete. Go, whatever. Like, let him miss the first 2 weeks of summer, like really talked me out of it. And I'm so glad that he did, because, we got the kid back. He we said, look, we'll make a deal with you. We understand you're football first, but we need you to be a part of our basketball program. And he ended up playing, and he had a great senior year. He had a phenomenal senior year, really helped us, and was such a great, just person to have in our program. So I'm glad I broke my rule there on that. But yeah, you're right. That can make for an awkward end of this interview. But yeah, in terms of micro goals, macro goals, that's always important. I think it's hard for sophomores to really see beyond like their 16-year-old self. Like, hey, where do you want to be in 2 years? What does that look like to you? And then what is it going to take to get there? Yeah. Especially if they're coming up from like the freshman team or the JV team, and they want to have a role on the varsity, that's a great opportunity. Like you said, okay, what does that look like? If you want to be a starter on varsity next year, here's what it looks like over the off season, or here's what the expectation is going to be. So it's a great opportunity, because I think a lot of kids have goals, but they don't always understand what it's going to take to reach those goals. Like, everybody wants to be a varsity starter, but here's what's going to take to get you there.
Yeah, I think when it comes to chasing down kids, I think it can be a little bit more nuanced than that. Certainly there is a kind of a talent evaluation where you're saying we could really use this kid, even if he's kind of feels like he's playing against his will. That's easy. But I think that there's also just the idea of 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. They don't always really know how they feel. They might be feeling something in the moment. And if you can kind of just, encourage them and keep them involved, there may be something there. You don't want them to feel like they did something permanent by exiting out of the program. Leave the door open. It makes you look good as a coach to take that in stride. But obviously you chase down talented players. That's probably good for the program in general. But with other kids, sometimes they just get confused, or they're on to trends where they like another sport a lot better right now, but their mind may change once they enter next season. So trying to keep the door open as much as possible, I think, is important there. With the goals, I was really big on goal setting. And I think, this is where I'm jumping into a lecture with each and every kid on what's a SMART goal. A SMART goal is specific. It's measurable. It's achievable. It's relevant. And it's time bound. Like, we can't just make goals that don't have those elements tied to them. So it's like, if you want to get stronger, what's your bench press going to be entering next season? What's your max squat going to be entering next season? How many shots are you going to shoot a month? How many shots are you going to shoot a day? Push-ups. Drink a protein shake every day if you need to gain weight. Things like that, specific stuff that you want to hone them in on. And then with the macro goals, you're looking at stuff where a kid's saying, I want to be all federal league by my senior year. And it's like, okay, I'd love for you to do that. We can facilitate that. It's going to take a lot. Currently, we have you as like the 4th or 5th best player in your class. So for you to be all federal league, you've got to become probably the best or second best kid in your class to merit that award. And our team has to do well. So what are we going to be willing to sacrifice for all that to happen? So goals, I just think them being specific and measurable is so powerful. And I've had kids get hot on this idea of chasing after a goal. And it really is. It's a journey of just doing the repetitive, boring things. And after a while, if you can really get a kid hooked on it, all of a sudden you can see big changes in an off season just by encouraging them, not just to think about, I want to be stronger, but specifically, I'm going to do 100 push-ups a day. I'm going to get my squat to this specific level, those kind of things. So we're moving on to, what do you see as your role in the program entering next year? What are you willing to do to achieve that? This is the same kind of conversation as with the goals, where it's like, you're 6th man on the JV as a sophomore, but you want to start varsity next year. We got to reconcile those things. There might be a pathway to do that, and there might not. And you've kind of got to gracefully dance through that with them so they understand kind of the big picture here. We're asking about other sports or other commitments. So this is where kids say, well, I might run cross country, or I might play golf, or I'm planning to do this or that. And really what you're trying to understand is, okay, if you have really big plans for what you want to accomplish in the program, how are you going to do that around all these other things that you want to do? It's not that we don't want you to play other sports or have these other commitments, but you can really only focus and improve on a finite amount of things. So that's kind of leveling the field for them, where it's like, okay, you're going to play 3 sports, but you also want to make leaps and bounds in your basketball. Let's be realistic about what that possibility looks like here. What would you say in terms of multiple sports for kids? Where have you fallen on with that, Coach?
I think basketball, unfortunately, it's becoming increasingly hard, if I'm being honest. I used to be very, very be a multi-sport athlete. I was a multi-sport athlete. I played football and basketball in high school. And I've always encouraged it, but I feel like right now, like a kid, as soon as basketball season's over, they just get pulled so many different ways.
Yeah.
And now football's becoming, bigger in Indiana. it's like as soon as basketball season's over, everybody feels like, well, now it's football season. And it's like, no, it's not. It's spring. Like it's baseball season. And so they're getting pulled into football. You need to get in the weight room and all that stuff's important, or if they're trying to play baseball, now they have travel. I mean, the travel stuff is crazy now. They're getting pulled every which way and parents are paying ungodly amounts of money. So I think it's a struggle now, unfortunately, for a high school kid. If they truly want to be a college level player, it is a challenge. I think you can play two. I think you can play maybe football and basketball, or you can play baseball, basketball. You can probably manage two, but I think the demands on kids' times now for every sport now is year round. It's really hard for a kid to be a 3-sport athlete and get better at basketball. And basketball it's a skill game. Think about it. Like in football, I'm sorry, like you can get in the weight room, and if you're just bigger, stronger, and a better athlete, you can probably have some success on the football field. It's why every football coach is asking basketball players to come play football, right? Because they're like, look at this athlete. He can come help us. Whereas on the basketball side, as coaches, we know it's a skill game. You have to develop your skills in the off season. And so I think sometimes it's a struggle for kids. And honestly, I feel bad for kids and parents because they get told every which way, you got to focus on this. You got to get in the weight room. You got to be at every travel baseball, event we have from the spring to the fall. And everybody's getting pulled 7 different ways, and a kid can't just focus and play what they want to play.
Yeah, generally speaking, I'm for letting kids do what they want to do, but I'll also level with them. I remember a specific circumstance where one of the better players in our program had just finished his junior year, and he was getting recruited at a pretty low level, but he was getting some interest from college coaches here and there. And he was saying, I want to get a scholarship and go play for North Carolina. And it's like, yeah, great. I support that. Here's a plan that would need to be in place for you to make those kind of strides to be getting on that level. We need to get you into a high level AAU program where those kind of coaches are going to be watching. We need to do this, that, and the other. And then he's also saying, and I also think I'm going to go out for football next year for the first time. And it's like, well,
it's always they're going to go out for the first time. Like they haven't played football, and then their junior year or their senior year, now they just get the wild hair and want to go play football. And you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, let's play this out. Let's say you do play football. You're going to be stronger from playing football. There's no doubt about that. But you also might get hurt, and you also might get into the season late. You might, if you guys go on a playoff run, you won't even be preparing with us in the preseason. And it's like, I'm not going to encourage kids not to do what they want to do, but I'm also feel obligated to also level with them where it's like, these things are kind of incompatible, and some things got to give. If you want to do both of these things, it doesn't seem like you should be able to do both of these things. It'd be amazing if you did, but from my perspective, here are the kind of the pros and cons of it. So, Coach, we've got a question here. How do you deal with young talent being better than juniors and seniors? Is that something you're comfortable addressing, or you want me to talk about it, Coach?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we've always approached that, I've started kids that were freshmen before on varsity. If we feel like you are in our top 5 or our top 10, you can help us win. We really don't care what grade you're in, if you're younger. And sometimes that can cause issues because I do feel like sometimes juniors and seniors, especially seniors, feel like they should play simply because they're a senior. And that's not always the case. You have to play your most talented kids. But you also, it can be challenging sometimes when you're trying to play freshmen and sophomores. But I've always said, if you are one of the top 5 kids, you'll start. If you're one of the top 10 kids, you'll be varsity. That's just how I've always approached it.
Yeah, I have some interesting thoughts on this. I've always kind of geared towards relying on my older kids and kind of trying to work the younger kids up at a slower progression. And if they start kind of pushing with, some urgency to get moved up quicker, that's something that I'll certainly, think about how that plays out. a lot of my mentors were more old school coaches, and they would say things to me like, you want to be careful moving a freshman up to varsity, because by the time they're a senior, they'll be done listening to you. They don't want to listen. They don't want to listen to you for 4 years. So if you can keep them down there, and I don't know how good of advice that was then, but I know it's terrible advice now, because there's so much freedom of movement where younger kids, if you're not progressing them up through your program, they'll just see you later. They'll go somewhere else and play somewhere. Anybody who'll put them on varsity, they'll go play. They've got plenty of opportunities. So I know that you can't really do that now at this point. But I would be trying to work through my older kids, make the younger player earn it, even if they're more talented. And then I've had seasons where, maybe 2/3 of the way through the year, we're a 500 team around there. We're not really a threat to win district. That's when you start to kind of tone down the minutes of the seniors and increase the minutes of the younger. So as natural as you can make it happen without like ostracizing a young, talented player, I think that's the approach that I would want to take.
Yeah. And the only times I've done it is when it was just a plain Jane, like obvious, this kid should be playing. You know what I mean? Like I had a freshman kid who was just, he was just better. And it wasn't even an argument. I didn't have any parent issues. I didn't have any older kids coming in and asking why he was playing. Like everybody knew, like, okay, yeah, this kid should be playing. So if it's one of those cases where it's an obvious plain Jane case, like, yes, but you're right. If it's any, other situation, probably better to make the kid earn it, show in practice, show on a daily basis that he can help you and he can compete at a high level and he can outwork, those kids that he's fighting minutes for. Yeah,
I will say I've always had a rule of like, you have to try out at the level that you're at. Where if you're a freshman, even if you have to go through at least the first day of tryouts with the freshman coach then is going to say, he's ready. He's too good for this level. Let's move him up and try him out with the JV in the varsity. But I never felt right. Just like, even if a kid had played with the varsity as a freshman through the summer or something like that, just automatically launching them up into like the varsity tryouts. Let's start at least the tryout process at your level with all the kids that are the same grade as you. And then we can make a decision from there. And even, all the times that we've done that with a kid that was advanced, it's usually, he just does one tryout and then he's up with the JVs, and he might even finish the tryout with the varsity. Who knows here? So, Coach, we'll get back into the document. We're almost finishing our first one here. But the next line of questioning is, how much do you like this? Do you want to really go to work with us? Are you willing to do 4 to 5 hours a day of work with our basketball program through the off season? 4 to 5 days a week. Sorry, 4 to 5 hours a day would be a very big commitment. Probably too much there. And then we're asking about the shootouts and the team practices in terms of committing to play in those, and if you see conflicts in those, so that we can see them ahead of time. And this is really what you're just begging for a kid to tell you, I'm all in. I will do whatever it is the program requires me to do, because I want this so bad. And when you get answers like that, then you know that you can really work the kid. You can make all the demands that you want in terms of accomplishing your goals. Well, you said you wanted to do this. All right, it's time. You can't want to spend time with your girlfriend now that we have our summer shootout here. You said you wanted to do this, and now you're committed to it. I want you to be here because you said you wanted this. So we're really just kind of taking the temperature of the player, and you're hoping that they give you kind of the all access pass to do your thing and try to shape them and mold them as much as you can with your program. Moving on from there, we're just trying to say, like, what times can you commit to on a regular basis? Because if we're running all of our workouts in the summer in the morning, and he's saying, well, I have to watch my baby sister in the morning each day, I can't participate, then you can reconcile that in some way. We're talking about AAU. Like, do you play AAU? Do you need help from us to find a team that's appropriate for your skill level? Is there a cost prohibitive factor that would be involved in you playing AAU? If you want to play AAU, we can help pinpoint you in the right direction, and we can kind of match you to a program that would fit your development curve. If you've got a kid that is too good for kind of the lower level AAU. You don't want him to just go sign up for like the base level of AAU where it's basically they're just taking your money and you get to play some games. You want to get them in the right kind of setting there. And finally, we're closing this out. What would be going on in your home life to prevent you from working as hard as you want to work? And this is things like, I can't get a ride to the school. This is things like, I've got to do babysitting of my siblings. I've got to take summer school because my grades weren't good. Well, so you're really just trying to find conflicts that you could work through because you want to find the kids that really want to work, and you don't want things standing in their way of accomplishing what they want to accomplish. So anything in this last block that kind of caught your attention, starting with how much do you like this and ending with what kind of conflict could be in the way of you achieving?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, number one, you see if they set all these high goals earlier. Does their ability to work match those goals, right? They set all these high goals, and then you're like, hey, can you be here 4 days a week? And they're like, oh, coach, I don't know about that. Yeah. You're like, well, hey, like this is what it's going to take. I think AAU is super important at the high school level of telling them like, hey, if you want to play college, if you had a kid that wanted to go to North Carolina, like those coaches aren't coming to every high school game. They're going to be at these huge AAU events. Like that's where you probably honestly get recruited even more than high school in some cases. And so making sure they're on a good AAU program, or if they aren't, making sure you get them on a good team, not just one of those, rinky dink teams that's playing in the local, tournaments and winning by 50 every time. And then I do like the last part that you had on there, the idea of like what's stopping you from getting to every workout. And you find out a lot of high school kids, they're relying on, mom to get, the 5 different kids to different places, and they might not have a ride.
Yeah.
I used to rip kids if they showed up late or if they didn't have a ride. And then, I learned as I got older, like, hey, this kid's 15. He's relying on his mom, to get him everywhere. He doesn't have a ride.
And it can be a pretty simple fix where it's like, okay, this assistant coach drives right by your house on the way to workout.
Exactly.
He'll pick you up, or, start buddying up with other players that are heading in the same direction.
Yeah, Jimmy lives in your neighborhood. Like he'll pick you up, so like, you're right. I think that question's important because you solve a lot of those little logistic issues that you get into during the summer or the season where you get all pissed off because a kid's late. It's like, okay, if I would have known this, 6 months ago, we could have had a simple fix. So yeah, I do like kind of addressing that in those interviews.
Yeah. And I tweet this all the time, but one of the things that I learned coaching was when a kid shows up late, my tendency would be to be like mad, like you're cheating the team, you're not responsible. And I reframed that into when someone shows up late, first and foremost, ask them if they're okay. That's going to be the starting point of the conversation. Hey, you good? You good, man? Like just go up to him, say, hey, you good? And, they might give excuses or they might, but sometimes there's really legit reasons why they're late. And for you to come in over the top and just like crush them right away because they're 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late, 30 minutes late or whatever, like maybe they had every single intention and made the right decisions to be there on time and it didn't work out because something crazy happened and they're not good. And when you address them in that way, it's a very positive thing. But when you do it the other way, where you're just like, all right, get on the line, you're here late, you got to run, that can really open up some wounds and some emotions if you've mishandled the situation. So, Coach, we've got we're over an hour here. We've got a document for exit interviews with your high school assistant coaches. Do you have time to jump into that?
Yeah, let's go. We're rolling, man.
This could be a marathon session unless you tap out, Coach. I don't want to keep you from your other obligations, but I feel like we're flowing and the energy's pretty good here.
We're snowed in here in Indiana. We already got the days off of school tomorrow. We're ready to go.
Yeah, I have a nice snow blower that I like to use. I was excited to kind of get out there and play around in it. And the snow was higher than the opening of the snow blower. So I had to like skim off the top layer first and then go back and get it at ground level. We got some serious snow here in Ohio. So now we're looking at talking to your assistant coaches. You're much more likely to get open and honest feedback from other adults than you are from kids who can be intimidated by talking to adults in a very frank conversation. But other adults, I think for the most part, unless they're really in survival mode with their position, they're probably willing to share very openly and honestly with you. So first things first, just like the other thing with the players, let's get some feedback. What were the highs, the lows? How'd you think we did overall? Did we underachieve? Do you have regrets? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the team? And again, some things might come out in here with the coaches, but a lot of this is kind of a conversation starter, a formality, a gauging their temperature on where they're at. What do you think when opening up an exit interview with your assistant coaches in that nature?
Yeah, I will advise all young coaches to do this. Like I said, it can be a vulnerable thing to hear one of your assistant coaches give you feedback, but it is vital. It is vital to truly audit your program, to truly improve, because like you said, they'll give you some honest feedback. And so getting some answers here can be super important to improving yourself as a coach. So do not take this lightly. Encourage your assistant coaches to be honest, to give you honest feedback, and then take it in. It's not a personal critique. It's just advice, or it's input trying to improve.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And the next question is kind of, do you plan to continue to coach? And if you're tight with your coaching staff, like you should be, most of the time you know this before an exit interview situation.
Yeah.
But the real important thing here is like same or different level, where you're kind of gauging their interests, where you might have an assistant coach who's like, I'd like to have my own team. I'd like to coach the freshmen or be the head coach of the JV. You might have a coach that wants to move up a level, but kind of understanding their needs and desires. You'll get coaches that'll say here, I want to be a head coach someday. I'd like more kind of mentorship from you to be able to apply for jobs or things like that. So I think kind of really addressing any mobility requests in terms of up and down the program and trying to honor those in any ways is a great way to respect your coaching staff. What do you say, Coach?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is super important because you'll hear from coaches like, hey, I was a varsity assistant this year, but I didn't feel like I got to coach a lot. Can I be the JV coach next year? And it surprises you because, some coaches wouldn't want to make that move, but you're like, oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be great experience for you. And then you also get to see, like you said, other coaches that maybe your freshman coach has aspirations of moving up and they tell you, hey, I want to move up and be a JV coach or a varsity assistant. Or you hear from those coaches that want to be a head coach one day, and then that allows you, okay, hey, we're gonna get you to be a head coach. I will make sure I mentor you. I'll show you the things that you need to learn, or here's what we need to do to get you into some interviews. So it really opens the door for yourself as the head coach to help those assistant coaches.
So next line of questioning here, what are your strengths? What are your kind of areas to improve, and how can I help with that? You'll get coaches here saying, well, I think I'm really good running practice, but I'd like to get better at, managing a program, or I'd like to get better at, relationships with the kids. And, as the varsity coach, this is your flock. Your assistant coaches are your flock, and you got to really, work for them, especially if they're making some kind of plea in this setting where they're telling you something very obvious that they'd like to improve on. And a lot of what this leads to is increased role next year into specific areas where it's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'd like to push more of the defensive side of practice onto your plate, and I'll let you run that in practice as the point person. And I'll stay back and I'll watch you, I'll honor you, but I'd like you to kind of take ownership over this part of the program, something like that. So it's an opportunity to give feedback to coaches, especially, a lot of coaches, there's not many coaches that are really good at everything. Even the best coaches, they have to delegate things. There's people that do specific things better than they do. So to just have your ear to the wall and hearing things, be able to react to them, and be able to put coaches in position to do what they want to do and get out of coaching what they want to get out of it.
Yeah, and similar to what I said with players, you often find coaches are very critical of themselves here. You know, they'll give you 10 different things they need to improve on. And so it opens up a conversation there where you say like, "Oh, actually, hey, I thought you did a good job here," or "Yes, like, yeah, you probably can improve here and here's how we're going to do it." But yeah, you often find coaches will be pretty honest with this question.
Okay, so next we're talking about describe to me your role. What did you like about it? What did you not like out of it? And what else could you do for the program to add value? You'll find some interesting things here where there's some coaches that are very willing to do a lot of the tedious behind the scenes work. There's some people that don't enjoy that very much. And I think that as the varsity coach, what you want to do is match people to their skill sets. So unless they're telling you, I want to evolve as a coach, if they're telling you they want to evolve, you might put them in places that might make them a little bit uncomfortable because that's a great place for them to grow. But a lot of coaches will just identify, I like doing the uniforms. I like washing and laying out the uniforms. I like
Yeah.
doing the scorebook. I like being responsible for the camera. So you need all that stuff to be done. And when a coach volunteers for that, I think you want to put them in and let them make it their thing, and make sure that you thank them a lot at the banquet that they took a lot of things off your plate that really helped the program. So anything about just exploring with coaches their ideal role?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things for an assistant to grasp is what is their role and then what isn't their role, right? Because I have often found, like, assistants are people pleasers. They want to do everything, and sometimes they almost do too much, if that makes sense. And I think sometimes that conversation is good for them to know what's not their role. And here are the things that, yeah, this is your role, or here's what we can add, and then here are the things that aren't your role, or you don't need to do. So I think both those things can be vital in answering that question.
Yeah, next is did I help you learn the game or see it differently? How so? This is kind of what sometimes as coaches, we're really good at things, but we just, because we're good at it, maybe it's naturally, we don't understand that it's impactful to other people. So you might be getting things drawn out in your the way that you teach things that you necessarily didn't identify. Next question: what did we do too much of? What did we not do enough of? So this might be anything from like game management, where we didn't sub enough, we didn't call enough timeouts, or it could be something like we used a drill too much or a drill not enough. Or I've even had situations where it's like we do too many extra things after practice. We're doing a team feed the next day, and then we've got this thing we've got to go to, and then we're having a team meeting, and then we're doing film. And I really took that to heart, or feedback during my coaching career, where I started to want to do a lot of team feeds, but I would do them like to replace practice. If I wanted to do an activity, it would replace practice instead of being on top of practice. And I thought that went a long way to give some kids some fresher legs, and also not feel like it's such an obligation to be in the basketball program where we've got to, we're going to the church to do outreach this day. And, there's just so much stuff that you can get into, especially if you're really trying to build a program. But you got to be smart about it, because you don't want to overload the kids, because they've got other interests and school assignments and other things that they need to do. Any thoughts on just gauging about things you do too much or not enough?
Yeah, I think it's important to hear from assistants, because oftentimes, they're really the ones putting in a lot of time for little amounts of money. They're almost doing the same amount that you're doing as a head coach, and they're getting, a half of the stipend or a third of the stipend that you get.
Yeah.
Not that we get paid great as it is, but they're sacrificing a lot of time away from their family and their kids. And then, sometimes you can add too much. You can be like, okay, hey, on Monday we have film after practice. Tuesday we have the meal. Wednesday we have this. And the guy, they're like, hey, this is too much. Like we can scale some of this back. So hearing that from your assistants can be pretty, like you said, helpful. And then, yeah, hearing about like what they feel about practice. What do we do too much of? What do we not do enough of? Game day things. What can we improve there? Yeah, just getting their feedback is really important here.
Yeah, moving on, we're asking, what are your feelings on how we structure things, how we delegate rules, how we handle players, how we prepare players, how we teach? So this is where you just want to have your ears open and be really receptive to feedback, not take it as a criticism, but you're going to get something here. If you're asking for, 5 different questions, one of them is going to stand out to your assistant coaches, and it's probably very valuable feedback to receive. So I would just want to try to really just have an open heart with the response that you get from this. Next would be, do you have any ideas on how to connect the levels of the program more? And what I found here is this can be kind of a useless question where what you're hoping for really never comes out because your assistant coaches don't necessarily think about the program in terms of how the levels fit together. They think about, I'm the freshman coach. I coach the freshman team. You may get some good insights, but I found that this one hasn't really produced a lot in my time doing exit interviews. Same with the one below. Do you have any ideas on fundraising? We're always looking for ways to inject some money in the program. Most of the time, there's not much here, but there might be something where it's like, I actually know so-and-so who I could approach for a sponsorship, and you just say, yeah, we love that. Last one here, off-season commitment. This is a big one. Anytime that I've had a volunteer assistant coach, I would have no demand on their off-season commitment. If you're a volunteer assistant coach and you want to come around the program in the off season, you're welcome to do that. But I'm not going to have a volunteer assistant coach and put demands on you need to be at all the shootouts, you need to be at all these workouts, things like that. But basically, you're kind of gauging, and you might find some stuff where it's like, hey, we're going on vacation for 2 weeks in June, and then you've kind of got to scramble your personnel. If your JV coach is gone for 2 weeks, that's not ideal. You wouldn't want that to happen. Hopefully they understand the repercussions before they would book something like that. But you're really just trying to gauge commitment and let them know that we're going to be working. And if you're getting a stipend from the school, where there's some expectation that you're going to be working too. And if there's stuff we need to work around, that's fine. This isn't like we need 100% attendance from you, but let's get a general commitment of what we're willing to do in an off season to make sure we've got the program headed in the right direction. Any thoughts on that, Coach?
Yeah, going back to those previous questions about, hey, what could we do to connect our program or fundraising? Usually when you have coaches that coach other sports, like, they coach football or they coach cross country, a lot of times they do have good ideas like, hey, this is what we did for a fundraiser. It was great. So I think those are important questions to ask because, they might bring ideas that you didn't even think about or something that worked for another program for them. And then, going back to commitment, I've never been around a good assistant who doesn't want to be around in the off season. If you're like, hey, where are you going to be at in June? And you're getting, some weird answers, like that's probably not a pretty dedicated assistant. I've never had issues with guys, not being there in the off season. Okay.
So we've got one more. Are you willing to jump into working on with our middle school coaches? These would be your feeder coaches that you're working with. So
yes, let's rapid fire. We got this. We got to give the audience what they want.
A lot of high school varsity coaches, they might have 2 middle school coaches, a 7th and an 8th grade, or you might have multiples where I coached at a bigger public school that had 2 7th grade and 2 8th grade teams. And then I also coached at a smaller parochial school where we had like 5 different feeder schools and they were all small. So this might be different depending on your level that you coach at, but I think it's still valuable for continuity in the program. And we're establishing the same kind of things where we're just talking about overall season opinion, highs, lows, regrets, biggest strengths and weaknesses. That's really kind of icebreaker talk. And then we're moving into, do you plan to coach at same or different level? You might have a guy who teaches at the middle school, wants to be at the middle school, likes connecting kids with that way, doesn't want to go to another building to coach another team. Or you might have a guy that's saying, hey, I'd like to go to 8th grade, or I'd like to come up to the varsity staff when there's an opening. So to find those kind of things out, I think is very telling. But we're getting into kind of scheme because obviously you're going to be connecting with your middle school levels in some capacity if you're getting to watch a game or something like that here and there. But I'm asking them, what was your primary offense? What was your secondary offense? What was your primary defense? What was your secondary defense? And we're going to do a preseason coaches clinic where we're setting expectations that, if we're running circle motion offense, you need to have it installed so that they're learning the basic fundamentals. And I always kind of dealt with the middle school levels where it was like, there's a bare minimum that we need from you to install from a tactics standpoint and from a cultural standpoint. And I need you to do that for me. But also beyond that, I want you to be able to do the things you think is right for your team to put your team in a position to win games. So I wouldn't want to, get into a situation where a coach was telling me, well, we played mostly 2-3 zone because we didn't have the personnel. That might have helped you this year, but we really need you to learn our systems here. So what do you think about just feeling them out for the tactics that they use and seeing how well they align with what you're doing at the varsity level?
Yeah. I will say in my experience, most junior high or middle school coaches are very receptive. They want the help. They want to be connected to the varsity program. And so you'll get some great feedback, and like I said, you'll get some coaches that have some willingness to try to install your offense or try to run the same defensive schemes that you run. So I highly encourage high school coaches try to have that connection. But you made a good point. Don't be over the top where you got to run this, and this. You can't do any of this. Like the more they feel like you're stepping on their toes, you may get more resistance there. But if you can have a good feeder system or good middle school program, it helps you tremendously as a high school coach, because now those kids are coming in prepared. You don't have to reteach from scratch circle motion, or you don't have to reteach, the principles of your man offense. You can, hone them in and get them better, but you're not having to reteach from scratch. Those kids are learning at a younger age. And I think that really helps and improves as they get to high school.
Yeah, what we need isn't like a carbon copy of what we're doing at the varsity level. It might be the precursors to the style of offense that we're running. If we're running circle motion, which is mostly off ball screening and cutting, we don't really want a primary offense to be a ball screen offense at the middle school level. We want something, even if it was like the flex that they were running, that's still an off ball screening and cutting system, which I think has a synergistic effect with the circle motion, as opposed to just completely contrasting concepts there.
Yeah.
So,
and you're right on the defensive side too. Like if your high school is a man-to-man, a certain style of defense, and you go down and you see your middle school team running like full court diamond trap press and falling back into a 2-3 zone, and that's all they do, they could be winning a lot of games. They might be winning games because they're just more athletic and, they're bigger, stronger, faster than a lot of the teams they play. But the kids aren't getting better. They're not developing, and they're not running the system that they're going to have to run the next year. So now you get a kid coming in as a freshman who's never played man-to-man defense, and you're having to teach him everything all over again. So super, super important to have that connection with the middle school teams.
Yeah. So moving on here, do you feel supported by me and by the high school? What could we do to help? Like you're really wanting to gauge for disconnect where you don't want them to feel like you're out on an island. I had at one point in my coaching career, I would put a calendar reminder for a weekly call, and I started calling my middle school coaches each week just for an update on what was going on at their level. And I found that to be too much. I felt like they would start bringing me into drama, and they would start bringing me problems that I had to solve.
Oh yeah.
That really wasn't the intention of the call. The call was just to really stay connected. So I didn't do that for very long, but I think that in practice, it can be a good idea to have some scheduled check-ins with your middle school coaches. What say you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is be visible at games as much as you can. I know like your schedule's crazy as a varsity coach, but the more you can, put that on your calendar, hey, they have these home games. and you pop over after a practice, it's just good for the players to see you there.
Yeah.
But then the coaches definitely feel more supported when you're there, you're watching. And then after the game, you just pop over and say something to them. Or even if you don't stay the whole game, just the fact that you were there and watched some of it, I think it goes a long way. So be visible. The parents will see it, the players will see it, the coaches will see it, and it goes a long way.
There's been many coaches with great intentions to go check out all their different feeder teams and all that. And when you're in the grind of a season, it's tough to get over.
It is tough. I've been there. It is tough. So that's I always would put it on my calendar. I would have coaches reminded me. And I always benefited because I had assistant coaches. A lot of times I would have kids, at the middle school level.
Yeah.
So they would remind me oh, hey, the 7th grade plays tonight. But yeah, it is tough. It is tough, especially, you got a big conference game on Friday. The last thing you want to do is pop over to a 7th grade game. But in the long run, it's super important to be visible.
Yeah, I would usually sit down with my coaching staff before the season, and we would divide out a lot of the games where we had representation in some capacity. It is kind of cool as the varsity head coach to go into the lower level games, and you walk in and people are whispering, hey, that's the varsity coach, pointing at you and stuff like that. But I think it is a big deal for those players to see you there and know that you're kind of invested in their level. Next question here, did the youth curriculum help? So that would basically be a packet that we would give them at our preseason coaches clinic. Preseason coaches clinic, we're inviting all of our coaching staff and all of our feeder coaches to come in. We're going to demonstrate drills. We're going to demonstrate concepts. We're going to talk to them, see how we can support them. We're going to buy pizza and feed them. And there's usually some on-court demonstration where typically we would use middle school players to kind of run through our drills, or depending on when we did it, if we were allowed to use our varsity players, we would use the varsity players. But we're basically trying to outline the schemes and the concepts that we want to see them using, and facilitating that, where there's a packet of here's all the teaching points for this drills, here it is diagrammed, here's our different plays, and it's really just a learning tool for them to kind of get a behind the scenes picture of what concepts we want them to be running. Did you ever use something like that, Coach?
Yeah, we would put together packets. Like I said, one of the big reasons I started a YouTube channel was for that, was to put drills, our varsity drills together for youth coaches to have. So that was kind of the initial, reason or logic behind it. In Indiana, it's a little different. It has grown feeder systems and working with your younger programs. And I actually honestly hated it sometimes, but in February, after the middle school season was over, February almost became this open period where high school programs now were working with their 7th and 8th grade teams. And now those kids were playing in weekend tournaments on Sundays and getting practice time. And a lot of varsity coaches would go now, not only in their own season, they're working with their varsity team. Now they're working with their 7th and 8th grade kids in the month of February. And it's a lot. It's a lot. And I think that's kind of the trend right now in Indiana. I wish that would go away to maybe more in the spring. But a lot of coaches see it as an opportunity. Once their season's over, now they can work for a month with the varsity coaches and be around. So that's part of what's in Indiana right now. But it's a struggle for varsity coaches. I know a lot of varsity coaches that don't like it just because you're just worn down. You're doing so much already.
Yeah, I honestly had never heard of something like that, but next, we're asking about, do you have ideas to connect the programs more? And typically what you get here is the middle school coaches saying, yeah, we'd like to come to more games. We'd like to get our kids more exposure to the varsity players. And you're making decisions on, how you can facilitate that for the next season. I think it is fantastic when those middle school coaches organize to bring their whole teams to games. We had it negotiated. I don't know if it's all that innovative, but that all those kids get into the game for free. I think you want to be able to provide that experience, and you want to get them over to watch the varsity in the varsity environment as much as possible. We're moving on to kind of strengths and weaknesses of the middle school coaches, and you might have seen them enough to identify some yourself, or you might just be, relying on what they tell you. But I think what you're really trying to do here is kind of pair your strengths with theirs, where if they're wanting to get better at something that you're particularly good at, you can do some mentoring there, or connect them to somebody on your staff, where if you have somebody on the staff that's really good at a particular thing and they're saying it's an area they want to improve on, you can provide some mentorship opportunities and connect them up with an opportunity like that. And the last thing here is gauging an off-season commitment. And what you're really looking for here is we would always do like some summer shootouts with the middle school level, but it's really not an intensive off-season program for the middle school coaches. And what you're really looking for is a coach to volunteer and say, I want to move up to the varsity level at some point. I want to move up to the high school level. I want to be a varsity head coach at some point. And you're taking that player and you're pulling them into your high school workouts where they can see that level, experience that level. You can build more rapport with them, and you're establishing that connection so that you can facilitate their growth into the coach that they want to be. Any thoughts there, Coach?
Yeah, two things. I think one, like you just said, having those guys be involved during the summer if they want to be, it makes them better as coaches. They get to see what you guys do at the varsity level. It's good experience for them. We've done things like we've done 7th and 8th grade shootouts. In Indiana, we have a lot of really good NAIA colleges that will do, 7th and 8th grade shootouts during the summer. Super Hoops is like a really big one that is done a lot. And we actually have some teams come over from Ohio that will play in that as well. But yeah, varsity coaches will coach that, but we get our middle school coaches involved. So it's just, and I think some of them like doing it because they get to work with the kids next, like, oh, I'm going to have this kid as an 8th grade next year. Like, I want to coach him during the summer. So you actually get a lot that, surprisingly volunteer and will do it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I highly invite your 7th and 8th grade teams to come watch your varsity practices.
Yeah.
Is if they can, because they will see the level, the difference in intensity, the difference in talking, the difference in the physicality. Because I think you get a lot of 8th graders, they're kind of making that turn, they're hitting puberty, and they're like, oh, I could play high school basketball, and then for them to sit there and see it firsthand of just like, this is different, man. And it allows the coaches to go back and, now their teaching points make sense. Hey, do you see why we do this drill? Hey, they're doing this drill. Do you see what what Coach Hack was talking about? Like, he said this, and this. This is why we talk to you guys. So it almost like re-emphasizes those teaching points. So we always encourage our teams. We would try to have them over once or twice a year, especially if it was going to be a tough practice, like one of those like really like knockdown, drag out practices. We would try to have them over for those so they could just get a little bit of a taste of what it's like and see what varsity level basketball is.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I always like to take our varsity team. We've got a good Division III program not too far away and a good D2 college program, and let them see that level. And all the kids that said they want to play college basketball see the kind of the speed and the intensity difference, because it is a stark difference from high school to the college level. But Coach, we've covered all three of these templates that I hoped to. It took a little bit longer than what I thought. But one of the reasons that I was really attracted to getting you on here to do these is because of your content, and your content where you're specifically talking about program building and helping young coaches. And I thought that your insights on the exit interview topic was very insightful, that you brought up a lot of things that I overlooked or didn't think about. So I think you were a tremendous addition to this topic, and I was just really pleased to have you on for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. Like I said, I know you feel this way, but we're just always trying to provide value to coaches. We're always trying to provide insights, value. If a coach can take one thing from, this talk, That's great. That's important. You know, we were both once that 25-year-old, 26-year-old young coach who probably needed more guidance and more help than we thought we needed. So I always think about that when I'm creating content or I'm doing talks like this. Is just give one ounce of advice or a tidbit somebody can take with them. So I really enjoyed it. Glad we could get through all those documents. And like I said, hopefully we provided some value.
Yeah, and it's funny that you brought up again that you started your YouTube channel, putting your drills on for your feeder school coaches, which is exactly how I started my YouTube channel. It was for highlights of our team program, and it was for drills and scheme for our youth and middle school and sub-varsity coaches to look at. So very cool, just the similarities that come out just from having more conversation with you. But Coach, I'm going to sign off there. I look forward to connecting with you on another one of these if you're game for it. But I really appreciated your perspective on the topic of exit interviews.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
See you, brother. Stay in touch.
See you.